What makes a good leader? Well, there are lots of answers, but very few of them address the issue of why 50% of leaders fail. Well, here with us today to maybe give us some insight is INSEAD Professor of Organizational Behavior, Michael Jarrett. Welcome to INSEAD Knowledge. Why do 50% of leaders fail? I mean, those were the statistics, research you gave me to read. Why?
I think there are a number of reasons why people fail as leaders. I think first and foremost, I think it's to do with the environment in which they're in. Some environments they do really well, so maybe they're good at the startup, but then they move to business as usual and they become bored, or they kind of chill out or check out of what's going on. Mm-hmm. Another reason we think that people fail is because of their inability to really understand what's going on in their situation. The way that we select people for leadership positions is quite faulty, really. It's not really based on good quality evidence by and large. It's usually some headhunter comes along, says this is the character, they seem to fit, and yet they don't draw on a number of the science that we can help us to understand whether they're good leaders or not. So there are various things that we can look at. So personality is a good indicator of leadership success. So by personality, I'm talking about the way people default, the way they think, the way they feel, the way they behave.
This is more than just charisma that
this
you're
is
talking about.
This is more than charisma. This is our default behaviours, the way we see ourselves, the way we act. It's sometimes to do with our childhood. It's sometimes to do with the environment around us.
That includes a dark side too.
It does. And in fact, when we think about leadership, there are two sides. There's what we call the bright side. So the bright side of leadership draws quite a lot on what we call the big five factors. So the big five factors, and excuse the language, are to do with our emotional stability, the extent to which we are extroverted, how open we are to our experiences, how emotionally sensitive and affable we are, and then finally be conscientious or driven we are. So these are the big five factors. And what the research tends to suggest is that if we're highly emotional, we tend to be poor on leadership effectiveness. Whereas those who are strong in effectiveness, and by that I mean able to deliver results, they're high on extroversion, they're immediately open, they have high levels of emotional intelligence, so they can link with people, and they're quite driven. Whereas on the dark side, there are psychological fault lines, I would describe, which lead to people either being withdrawn, psychologically withdrawn, having a sense of aggrandizement, everything has to be, it's all about me, and sometimes I would call about micromanagement, so being obsessive. And these are the things we also know lead to poor management. So I think there's some work which has been said that the things that I really hate about my manager is he or she tends to be dishonest, he or she tends to micromanage me, he or she tends to be aggressive or bullying in some way. So we know that some of these defaults can actually go against us.
So let me go back a little bit here. What's wrong with the selection process that all of what you've just said doesn't always factor in? I mean, you have sort of one list of criteria, and this candidate fits it, but the Gestalt doesn't work.
Yeah.
What's missing?
What's missing? So what the evidence suggests is that when we pick people, we pick them mainly on the bright side. So imagine you interview somebody. You sit down, you ask them the traditional questions, and you write these things down. But really, we don't really know them, do we? What we do know, though, is that if we take something like maybe a 360 or talk to people's their direct reports or to their peers, then we'll probably get more of a sense of who this person is. Probably get more data which is realistic and which we can use.
So, some leaders look better to their superiors than to their employees.
Yeah.
I mean, what's this all about? Which is more important? I mean, if you want to climb the ladder, you got to look good to the people up there.
Right. It's a good question. So research shows that people who don't manage their bosses typically derail. And by derail, I mean those folk who look like they're on a trajectory of success, but they fall off, and that's one of the reasons that they can derail. So managing up is essential, and there's no doubt about that. But if you do that at the expense of the people who work to you or your colleagues, then you're just going to upset them. And if you think about that, management and leadership particularly is about creating results through people, then you're undermining your own chances of being successful as a leader. And ultimately, you need people to be bought in. So you need to really manage all of the stakeholders.
How do you know if you're not? What are some of the signs there? I mean, I guess if you're not managing upward, you don't get promoted or you get fired. But
So some of the indicators which you might know, well, you would get feedback potentially from direct reports saying something. You know, so, hey, boss, I noticed that when you dealt with that situation, it didn't go as well as you expected. So that might be one thing you might do. You might notice that there are people who are coming up behind you who are overtaking you, who've gone up the leadership ladder much faster, been promoted, or have got a better bonus than you if that information is available. It's how you deal with it, though, which makes you a leader or not. And it's not so much that we may derail, but the fact that we can learn something from it. And so those lessons from experience then become the springboard for us, regaining a sense of agency and becoming much more leadership quality.
That takes a certain amount of humility to be able to do that.
Definitely.
How does a leader's personality affect the way his team functions?
Well, it has quite a major impact. So we know that the personality of the leader will have an impact on the team in several ways. So first of all, it will set the culture of the organisation and of the team. Secondly, it will have an impact on the team members around them. So research suggests that if we have a leader who's positive, outward-going, can see the world as a beautiful place, well, this affect tends to infuse the people around them. They get enthusiastic, and that leads to higher performance. Whereas if leaders come in and they say, oh my gosh, I don't want to be here today, oh, isn't the world awful, and they see the world as very dark, then hey, guess what happens? This is true also for the people around them, for the team, and also the types of performance. So leadership personality has a direct impact both on the team members and on performance within organisations.
Does leadership training and coaching actually work?
That's a great question. As you know, coaching typically is something from about 6 to 12 months. It's usually on a monthly basis, and you're working with an experienced coach. Coaching is not the same as therapy, but it's really about trying to understand who am I, how do I take up my role effectively in the organisation. So the research suggests that for the right candidate, getting the right coaching approach, it does seem to have an impact. People do change their behaviours and do have an impact on their organisation. So way back, maybe about 10 years ago, we did some research on people who went through this kind of a program, and then we reviewed them 6 months and 12 months later. And what they reported, so it's a self-report, they reported that they felt more effective and more confident in their work in terms of taking up their leadership role. And these were MBAs in a business school.
How do you think leadership training has, because you've been doing this for a long time, how has it changed in the last 10 years? I mean, they've been a pretty active 10 years just in terms of the way the world has changed.
Yeah.
So how has leadership training, coaching, what's the emphasis?
So I think there's 2 or 3 trends. So one trend is definitely an increase in executive coaching. And what's nice about that, it's much more personalised. Yeah, so you get a tailored solution to your leadership issues. A second trend that we're seeing is, I think, much more use of experiential groups, either in the form of simulations. I'm talking maybe the use of actors or being put into a difficult situation to see how you respond. And the other one, as I was saying, is this sort of what I would call the Tavistock type approaches. So this is some work which is based on the psychology of leadership and how people take up their authority in groups which tend to be leadership and leaders emerge. And from that, you can work out something about the group dynamic and also about how people take up their authority. The other thing which I've noticed, which I find more disturbing, though, is as we get in a more faster moving world, people want to take a bite size of leadership. So there are some organisations I know which provide leadership in 1.5 hour blocks. Yes.
How can you do that?
We challenge. I think it's really about increasing people's abilities to think about it, increase their understanding, rather than changing their behaviours. So I guess some exposure or developing a common language. And also we're seeing the internet and different modules that you can buy, or a webinar. There's increasingly a form of leadership development. But I think they're much more about understanding and creating a common language than about behavioural change. The final area, I think, in terms of leadership development is the fact that we're much more culturally diverse, we're more global, and understanding that this has an impact on leadership. So whilst there's been some work that the Globe studies, which has looked at global leadership, there are some commonalities about leaderships across the world, so being able to have a vision, being able to coach, empowering people.
When we talk about diversity, let's look at who has been managed sort of traditionally, when we think about the textbook, literally case.
Yeah.
It's been a white male,
Yeah.
high school education,
Yeah.
probably working in manufacturing or some kind of old industry.
Mm-hmm.
That's changing today, and I can only think all the predictions are saying like in 10 years it's going to be completely different with
Yeah.
service economies for the most part, except for
Yeah.
maybe the emerging markets. And it's going to be more creative.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about ideas,
Yeah.
pushing the envelope.
Mm-hmm.
Who can manage that?
It's going to be much more challenging managing going forward. So what do we see? So one is about how do we manage creativity, yeah? And people, I guess we call them knowledge folk. Yeah, I think some of the areas around that will be around managing norms and behaviours and getting people to buy in. If you think about the creative types, they're highly independent, self-motivated. They like to have a sense of space. So traditional management methods, which might draw more on systems and processes, are definitely not going to work. What we're going to have to do is those which are much more empowering, have some clarity about what the end goal is, but how you get there, I think it will be down to those individual workers. And I think the other trend that we're noticing, if you think about Generation Y, I think we're in now, who typically want to have a broader lifestyle. They're very smart. They don't see the work as who they are in terms of their identity. Issues like the environment, the fact that you're a good employer, these are things that are important. And again, this will be much more challenging managing the workforce and managing this sort of new age compared to the old styles which we're used to.
Let me end by asking you if you have any sort of general overall comments about where you see the future of both leadership and training these people going, because it seems as though there has been a sea change.
I think the three things I think would be the trends I would think we need to respond to. So one is, again, the globalization and internationalization. So with countries like China and India are going to be the big players going forward, what is our response to working in those areas? And the challenge will be how can we translate what is essentially Western methodology around management to put into these cultural contexts. And I think that's going to be a challenge. So that's one area. I think the other area which we haven't spoken about at all is sort of the genderization of leadership. So far it tends to be fairly in a male-dominated context, and that's another challenge which we need to look at.
So women, you're going to have more women in the workforce
so
and
more women in the workforce, but also when I think about the genderization, about how the language, the metaphors, the structures tend to be male-dominated, and what can we do about that? And the third area, I think, in terms of the trends will be technology, which will have a sea change and is moving so fast all of the time that it's quick for what was appropriate technology or appropriate knowledge to decay and become useless. And I think those are the three challenges that we have going forward.
You want to make sure that people don't decay and become useless.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michael Jarrett, for being with us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you.